the biggest takeaway is really the dangling of the fact that they're saying basically, if you want to take these kind of measures against our companies, we can kind of hit you more where it hurts, because there are quite a few drone manufacturers in both the US and across the West who rely on components from China.
Washington just brought a knife to a drone fight. While everyone's talking about symbolic sanctions, I've got the receipts that show China is squeezing the one supply chain the US can't live without. Here's what actually happened. On August 5th, China's Commerce Ministry announced a new round of countermeasures. Restrictions on 7 US entities, tighter export reviews on drones headed to the US, and it blacklisted a US certification lab. Compliance testing out of Mesa, Arizona, from doing business with any Chinese company or individual. Why? Because the US had just tightened its own curbs on Chinese telecom operators, testing labs, and drone tech, and added over 40 Chinese companies to this rubbish Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act entity list. There's also a clip going around from a CGTN Europe interview on this. A trade expert breaking it down, and one line says the whole thing in one breath. She puts it like this: China can now afford to hit you more where it hurts. 6 words. That's the entire strategy. Not retaliate, not respond. Hit you where it hurts. Read that as, we know exactly which nerves to press, and we're choosing to press it slowly, in public, so you watch it coming. And this isn't a one-off. It's the latest lap in a race that's been running for years. Rare earth export controls, drone component restrictions, entity list additions, stacking on entity list additions. Tit for tat since at least 2023. Now, here's why this actually cripples American industry, not just annoys it. First, the drone supply chain. China controls roughly 80% of the global consumer drone market. A single company, DJI, holds an estimated 90% of the US commercial drone market on top of that. American drone makers like, Skydios, the Brinks, the defense-adjacent startups this whole trade war keeps circling, don't just compete with Chinese manufacturers. You see, here's the blunt version. If China stops shipping the batteries, motors, and flight controllers these companies build on, American companies don't have a product to sell. A tighter export review isn't paperwork. It's a slowdown that shows up as missed delivery dates, blown contracts, and margins evaporating on products that were already razor thin. Second, the bureaucratic kill-switch. Blacklisting compliance testing sounds boring until you realize what a certification lab actually does. It's the gatekeeper that tells regulators a product is safe to ship. Cut a US lab off from Chinese partners and clients, and you've just made it slower and more expensive for American companies to get products certified for markets that still run through Chinese supply chains or Chinese buyers. That's friction injected directly into the plumbing, not the storefront. Third, and this is the one that should really worry you MAGA asshats, rare earths. China hasn't even played this card yet. Everything so far, the drone reviews, the certification blacklist, that's China squeezing a secondary pressure point. Rare earths are the move they're sitting on. Roughly 71% of US rare earth imports came from China between 2021 and 2024. And the US remains around 67% net import reliant on foreign sources for most rare earth elements, 100% reliant for some, like scandium and yttrium, which have direct defense applications. While they're squeezing the drone industry today, remember, they're still holding the actual nuclear option in reserve. Every one of these targeted sanction rounds happens with that fact sitting quietly in the room, and China doesn't need to touch it to remind everyone it's there. Put it together, and you get the real story. This isn't two economies trading symbolic slaps. It's one side squeezing specific pressure points in a supply chain the other side still doesn't fully control. Let's watch what this trade expert had to say on CGTN Europe, because spoiler, even the diplomats are basically saying the quiet part out loud.
Ali Renison is a former UK Trade Department official. Great to have you on Global Business Europe. So what, for you, really stands out from here? Which of these measures really count?
I think the most important measure really is the part about sort of export controls that China has now placed, not just on drones, but drone components and associated technologies. So obviously it's sort of added in sort of like-for-like countermeasures around placing some U.S. companies on sort of similar bans in the way that the U.S. has done with Chinese companies. However, I think the biggest takeaway is really the dangling of the fact that they're saying basically if you want to take these kind of measures against our companies, we can kind of hit you more where it hurts, because there are quite a few drone manufacturers in both the US and across the West who rely on components from China.
There it is. She said on international television that China is dangling the threat of hitting the West where it hurts, because Western drone manufacturers rely on Chinese components. That's not spin. That's not a hot take. That's a former UK trade official calmly stated the West built its drone industry on a supply chain it doesn't control. Think about that. You can pass all the sanctions you want. You can add all the companies to all the lists you want. If the part inside the drone still has to come from Shenzhen, you haven't won anything. You've just made your own supply chain more expensive.
Now, this came just days after what both sides had called a constructive call. Is the real story here that the timing as much as the measures themselves?
I think they're both fairly important. We've seen this pattern of escalation sometimes on either end, not only as sort of a meeting between the two leaders of both countries, but also around sort of big calls. And I think that there is some testing of the waters and escalation in terms of creating leverage, because we may see some meeting between the heads of state in the future, and that provides a pretext for, I think, potential de-escalation.
You talked about we might see the two leaders meeting, and there has been talk of Xi and Trump meeting in person soon. Do you think this kind of exchange actually threatens it, or is it just the two sides sort of jockeying for position before they sit down?
I think there's some substantive concerns, particularly from China's end, that they want addressed in terms of they don't like this sort of up and down bumpy ride that they see. They want some consistency. However, we've also seen this happen before, where measures are escalated and then through a summit between President Xi and President Trump, they're effectively de-escalated. So jockeying for position is certainly part of it.
And this is the other tell. China isn't the one asking for the meeting. China is the one saying, call us when you've got your act together. The framing here isn't, please stop, we're scared. It's, we'll wait for you guys to figure out you need us.
There's this one phrase that both sides keep using, strategic stability, even while they're trading sanctions. What would it actually take to make that kind of language meaningful?
I think that if you had, certainly we've seen the relations between Scott Bessent, the sort of Treasury Secretary, and his sort of counterpart in the Chinese government meeting to try and resolve some of these sensitive issues through dialogue. I think what China is perhaps looking more from is to have a sense of an overarching approach to relations with China on trade that don't mean that even when you have a summit that de-escalates, you then get different parts of the United States government and regulators coming in and sort of whacking bans on sort of Chinese companies, here, there, and everywhere. I think they want to see, we do know that the U.S.-China Board of Trade idea that was proposed at the last summit between the leaders, that is meant to try and deal with some of these issues, but it's not going to tackle the really sensitive issues. So I think they want some stability in how both President Trump approaches China and the rest of the U.S. government does as well.
This is the line that actually explains the whole dynamic. China's complaint isn't that the U.S. is tough, it's that the U.S. is scattered. Treasury does one thing, Commerce does another. Some agency slaps a ban nobody coordinated. Meanwhile, China's countermeasures land as a single coordinated commerce ministry announcement, timed within 48 hours of the US move that triggered it. And can we talk about how insane that is? One government body issues one statement one time and it ripples through drone reviews, entity lists, and certification labs simultaneously. Meanwhile, the US side is out here with Commerce doing its thing, Treasury doing its thing, some regulator nobody ever heard of dropping a ban on Tuesday. Nobody's on the same page. You can't win a chess match when your own pieces aren't talking to each other. One side has leverage and a plan. The other side has leverage in theory and 5 different agencies freelancing. So when the expert says China is dangling a threat, they aren't guessing. They're reading a supply chain like a scoreboard. And here's the raw data they're looking at. Here's the uncomfortable truth for anyone hoping this ends with America winning a trade war. Sanctions only bite when the other side needs something you control more than you need something they control. Right now, in drones and rare earths specifically, that math does not favor Washington. So next time someone tells you the US is getting tough on China, ask them who actually needs whose supply chain more. Because based on what we just watched, China isn't reacting to America's pressure. It's setting the terms of the next call. Is the US actually getting tough? Or is Washington just making life impossible for its own tech companies? Drop a comment. Do you think there's a plan behind all this? Or is the government just flying blind and hoping tariffs and bans add up to a strategy? Well guys, that's all I've got for you. Like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Until next time, I'll see you in the next one.